Welcome, my name's Dr. Tim Anstis. Just delivered a workshop looking at what might be good practice in talking with angry or disgruntled parents on the phone, and I'm now going to give a brief review of what may be good practice and give some tips out for people who may have been unable to attend the workshop or want to practice things further. So let's start with the end in mind. What would represent a good outcome from a conversation with a perhaps hostile or irritated parent? Well, if they just feel understood and heard and less defensive or hostile, that would be one good outcome. If they go beyond that and actually start to perhaps be curious or inquisitive about change, that would be another good outcome. And if they actually decided to go away and maybe consider making some changes around healthy eating or physical activity for themselves, their family or their child, that would be a great outcome. And we're going to talk about ways of responding and talking with parents which increase the probability that one or more of those outcomes will be achieved. First, a little bit of theory. One of the things that we notice in conversations that aren't going so well is resistance. People may be arguing with us, denying, blaming, looking out the window, changing the subject, or even just passively agreeing with us. What we know is the more resistance there is in a conversation, the least likely people are to change, and the less empathy and understanding there's probably is in the conversation. We also know that what we as clinicians say and do can increase resistance, and we're going to talk briefly about some of the things clinicians and practitioners can say and do to reduce resistance. But no one really likes to be told what to do, and perhaps that's why people are resistant when they're on the phone in the first instance. Because if you want to increase resistance, you could simply take away someone's control by telling them what to do. You could overestimate how important an issue is for the person, or how confident they are about changing, or their readiness. Or you could argue with them and try and persuade them and point out where their thinking is in error. So if you want to increase resistance, take away control, overestimate importance and confidence, or try and persuade. And if you want to reduce resistance, there's a few things we're going to talk about in the rest of this little interview. Let's talk also briefly about the 4 principles of motivational interviewing, which can be remembered by the acronym RULE, R-U-L-E. Firstly, resist the writing reflex. In acute care settings, people come to us with a problem. We may wish to diagnose, find out what's wrong, take a history examination, and kind of tell the person what they need to do. We want to fix them, and that's all well and good. In behaviour change, this desire to fix people by jumping in with unasked for advice can get in the way of behaviour change, because we want to elicit from them their intrinsic motivation rather than guess what their reasons are. So principle 1 of motivational interviewing is to resist the writing reflex. Principle 2 is to understand the person's dilemma. They will probably feel 2 ways about an issue. They'll be ambivalent, and we wish to help them explore and resolve the ambivalence, and we do that well by understanding with empathic listening. Principle 3 is to listen. This is quite an active process. Listen with empathy. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And principle 4 is to empower and encourage optimism and hope. We may not get there in a conversation which is a response to the parent being angry perhaps about an issue, but ideally we would like to empower and encourage hope and optimism about change being possible. The spirit of motivational interviewing is characterised by 3 things. One is it's a collaborative approach. This is something we do with someone, not to them. The second principle, characteristic of the spirit of motivational interviewing, is it's evocative. We draw out concerns, ideas, and motivations and reasons from the person rather than putting them in. And the third characteristic of the spirit of motivational interviewing is it is autonomy supporting. We never forget that the client, patient, parent is the active decision maker, not us, and we emphasise options and ways forward, and that they are the ultimate decision maker. So what I'm going to do briefly is share with you an imaginary dialogue, but based on the kind of things which parents say, and I'll alternatively be the parent and then be a practitioner. What you'll notice the practitioner doing is being empathic, is making reflective listening statements which are kind of guesses as to what the person is feeling or means without being judgmental. If I ask a question, I'd like to think it's going to be an open question, how or why might or what, rather than a do you think, could you, have you tried. Closed questions tend to trigger to help the practitioner fall into the yes but trap. So we're hopefully going to see some open-ended questions, maybe some summarising and some empathic listening, and during the course of this imaginary dialogue you see the resistance go down and maybe even the emergence of what's called change talk. So change talk is natural language markers, so these are things which appear in the conversation which indicate that the person may be moving towards change. See if you can listen, see if you can notice any change talk in this dialogue. You can remember change talk by the acronym DARN CATS. So D is desire, I'd like to, I wish. A is ability, I could, I can. R is reason, it would be good if I did, it would help me, it would help them. And N is need, I really should, I need, I must. C is commitment language, I will, I'm going to. And AT of CATS is actively taking small steps. What the research shows is that if we can elicit and develop DARN language, desirability, reason and need, and it helps the person elaborate and continue, then commitment language, I will, I'm going to, may emerge. And commitment language combined with taking small steps is predictive of behaviour change, which is after all what the whole purpose of the programme is about, helping parents work with their children to eat more healthily and become more active. So let's go through this dialogue and then we'll talk about it briefly afterwards. I'm calling because you sent a letter to me telling me that my child is overweight. I didn't expect to receive this information. I find it alarming that you've sent information without knowing who it is you're sending it to. Here's a reflection. So you were surprised to receive this information and are worried about how this came about. I'm not defensive, I'm just helping the person feel understood by paraphrasing or reflecting back a little bit of what the person said, maybe guessing what they're going to say next. You're worried and you're worried about how this came about. They then might say, yes, I feel it's very intrusive. Your information portrays my son as a statistic in the overweight category when he's only 3 pounds overweight. There are many other children at his school that are fat, but he's not one of them. Here's what an empathic, supportive conversation might look like. Now that you've received this information about your son, you're not sure you agree with what it's saying. Would it be okay with you if I gave you some background information about this school measurement program? What's happened here is the practitioners moved into maybe elicit, provide elicit, asking permission. Would it be okay if I shared some information? We're then going to share some information with the parent, but then we're going to follow up with E. What do you make of that? We're not going to tell them how to interpret the information. So the parent would typically, if you ask, would it be okay if I shared with you, may say, well, okay. So the practitioner again. This is a government programme that's being implemented nationally where all children in Year 6 are weighed and measured and the data is checked as part of the collection process. For this data it's determined if a child falls into the overweight category or not. Parents are written to with the results. What are your thoughts on this? So you're not telling the person how to interpret it, you're genuinely being curious about what they make of it. Well, my child doesn't seem overweight. He's a very active boy who eats a healthy, balanced diet, and I monitor the snacks and foods he has, so this information doesn't give a true picture. He seems very healthy and slim. Here's what a helpful response might be. It's hard to believe the data when your son seems so fine, and it's important to you that he's fit and healthy. Slight affirmation there. There's a recognition that being a good parent is important to to the person on the other end of the telephone call. You can see there's a friendliness, there's a collaboration, there's a non-defensiveness, there's empathic listening. There's not telling the person what to do, jumping in with advice. There's a real attempt to understand and show that you're trying to understand, to help the person feel heard and understood. Exactly, I do what's best for my son. And I suppose he doesn't always eat as healthily as he should. It's difficult this time. I was really upset by the letter. It's worded very insensitively. You're seeing some ambivalence emerge. Recognition that maybe things could be different, but at the same time being upset by the process. So a skillful practitioner might say, the letter is what upset you the most. Now you're thinking about it, maybe there could be some ways to improve your child's diet. What would help you do that? That may be a little bit too early, that open question, what might help you do that? It might be some more empathic listening is required. And maybe then the parent would continue, well, I'm on a set income, so maybe help managing to eat healthy on a budget would be useful. So that's idealistic. It's just illustrating some of the points we taught on the day. Don't be defensive, don't argue, roll with resistance, use reflective listening and summarising to help the person feel understood. Maybe then some ambivalence emerges, maybe some change talk. There's an opportunity then to reflect back the change talk, possibly with an affirmation, to come alongside the parent so you're working on the same page, establish empathy and rapport, and then perhaps, or definitely, move on from there. That's a brief overview of motivational interviewing informed, helpful conversations with parents who may be frustrated. And thank you very much for listening.